The practice of this yoga hinges upon discovering and noticing clearly the mechanism of interpretation. So, experience is present, and it is simultaneously interpreted as being consisting of this and that happening in this and that way, and one essentially, through this process of interpretation, one's intelligence defines oneself into existence, defines one's world into existence, defines one's circumstances into existence, and so on and so forth. And then you have the whole juicy, intimate details of your life and your circumstances and your goals and your problems and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of which actually exists. But it's not simple. It's not as if reality is a blank sheet of paper and all of the details are imagined. It's not like that. It's subtler than that, which is part of the difficulty in clearly noticing and clearly perceiving this mechanism, this potency that exists spontaneously in our intelligence. There is an apparent appearance which is incredibly detailed in terms of the qualities that seem to be being presented. All sorts of colors and shapes and flavors and textures and experiential qualities are instantaneously appearing and disappearing as you experience. But that's all that's there. There is essentially no continuity. There is essentially no context. There is essentially no backstory. It's precisely analogous to the condition of a dream. Now, when you're dreaming, there's an apparition of all of these experiential qualities, but of course nothing's actually there. No circumstances are actually there. No environment is actually there. It is merely an apparition. But the intelligence is free to, and has the potency to, elaborate on this and use this apparition as the basis for an essentially free associated interpretational framework that defines oneself as being in a certain circumstance. One defines oneself as being in certain conditions, defines, the whole curriculum vitae of the apparent circumstances that one seems to be stuck in and one seems to consist of. And again, it's not like it's nothing there. It's not like the dream is literally just blank and then all of this is being imagined. There are sufficient qualities. It's like an infinitely detailed Rorschach blot. That is, it has sufficient detail and sufficient density of information and implication to serve as the perfect basis for all of this free associating. But then the association takes over, and one ends up possibly interpreting oneself as consisting of a certain, creature being limited to that in certain circumstances or in a certain, history of one's life, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The whole story of what seems to be going on here. Now, it's not a matter of stopping doing that. This is a fine point. It's not a matter of stopping interpretation. That cannot be done. Or possibly it can be, but good luck. But the mind endlessly spins these interpretations. But it's not a matter of stopping the interpretations. It's a matter of seeing the interpretation so that one can discriminate that these interpretations are in no way real. They're fantasy. They're free associations. It's just exactly like looking at a Rorschach blot and saying, "Oh, that looks like a lion," or "That looks like, the wind blowing up Marilyn Monroe's skirt," or "It looks like this," or "It looks like that." Sure, it may look like that, but it isn't that. Sure, this may look like you being a human being in your body, in your life, with your history, with your family, with your this, with your that. Cool, no problem, no contest. But it isn't that. And that is exactly the fine point which can be discovered. Now, fortunately, what this actually is very clearly present, and is amenable to examination. So by looking at closely and in detail and precisely at one's experiencing, it's possible to develop sufficient sensitivity to notice the nature of actuality, to notice the nature of this that is here, that I call radiant presence, but it doesn't matter what you call it. The point is to see the thing itself, see the condition itself, so that you can recognize it. And once you recognize it, you'll be able to discriminate between this that is here, that is actual, and all these fantasies that are actual in their presence, but are not actual in their meaning. So fantasies are real. They're real fantasies. but they aren't true. It's real that I may think I'm Peter Brown, and I may think I was born 65 years ago, and I may think this, that, and the other, but it's not true. And that exactly is the fine point. That exactly is the issue in this yoga. Is coming to see coming to recognize the quality of actuality versus the quality of interpretation. And once you become trained and develop your sensitivity, let's call it, sufficiently to recognize this, then it is much easier and arguably ultimately impossible to confuse the two. So this exactly is the fine point. Let's see. Anything I've left out? So some of the qualities of actuality are, you've heard me mention many times, it's indefinable. Interpretations claim to be definable. Interpretations claim, this is this and that's that. But actuality is not. Actuality, if you look at it, it opens. The information density exceeds your ability to pin it down. Period. Continually, across the board. No matter where and how deeply you look, you will discover this quality. Actuality is also instantaneous. It's only here, right now, right here. Boop. As opposed to history and projection and the future and causality and all these other things. Actuality has a vitality and a juiciness and it's kind of difficult to define precisely what that is, but there's a richness and a depth and a profundity in the qualities that present as actuality, whereas interpretations tend to be a little sketchy, a little shallow, a little non-nourishing in terms of their content, and so on and so forth. And of course, even specifying these qualities is absurd, because the nature of what this is so slippery, so fine, that these qualities cannot be actually found as such, cannot be defined or precisely pinned down as such to exist. So, perhaps the overarching quality of actuality is its unresolvability. Nothing can be precisely resolved as to being one way or another, as to being this or that, as to exactly what it is and exactly how it is that. It is always ambiguous. It's always, well, it's kind of like this and kind of like that, and also a little bit like this. And, and this quality of open-endedness, of ambiguity, is, all of these qualities become very recognizable when one, invests a little sensitive attention to what is here and the way it is here. All of this is really quite simply discoverable. As I've said many times, reality is easy to see, but unreality is hard to extricate oneself from, which means that the addiction to the involvement in these interpretive frameworks, to these stories, it's like, oh my God, such and such is happening, and I have to look out for it, and I hope for this, and I want that, and all of this. It's like keeping up with your current soap opera of, who did what to who and what's going to happen in today's exciting episode. It's all very fun and juicy, but it's not real. And exactly the same sort of condition exists here. It's so seductive and so tempting to get caught up in these interpretations. And again, it's not like you have to stop interpreting. It's not like you even have to stop being caught up in it. Just see that it is that, and your life will become very much like your favorite soap that you watch on TV. It's really the exciting adventures of Peter Brown and what's going to happen to him tomorrow. Will they successfully diagnose his diseases and come up with an effective treatment or not? Stay tuned. So much hangs in the balance. It's very juicy and exciting. Probably not for you, but and that's all fine. It's not like you need to shut that down or deny it or somehow, I am not Peter Brown. I am the clear light. It's like, it's all vague. It's all arbitrary. It's sure, I'm Peter Brown, but having said that, what that really means is I am this inconceivable, transcendental, radiant presence that is here, that looks an awful lot like Peter Brown and what I identify as the details of my life, but it is more than that. It's not actually that, and not just in some trite philosophical sense, but in actuality, in the physical fact of what it is and the way that it is this instantaneous transcendence. And this is discoverable and recognizable. In any field of human endeavor, it's possible to look at it in terms of theory and practice. In the case of true spirituality, that becomes very difficult to address the theory, because spirituality is about the nature of reality. Spirituality is about what is actually here and the way it is actually here. And what this is intrinsically unresolvable. It cannot be described. It cannot be resolved into this or that, which makes it a very difficult thing to talk about, because of course our words are based upon the idea of being able to designate something, designate this, designate that, and so on and so forth. However, we can talk about the theory of practice and the practice of practice, so that makes it a little more useful. And in actual fact, practice is the important part, in my opinion. I designate what I present as a yoga because it is a potentially productive mode of engagement. So, the theory of the practice of spirituality consists of a fairly simple phenomenon. The fact that the actuality of what you are, the actuality of what this is inconceivable, but typically humans don't know that. Typically humans think it is describable, it is conceivable, and proceed to do so with wild abandon. So typically you think you know who you are, you think you know what's going on, you have a whole worldview and a whole elaborated schema in imagination that describes, theoretically, I mean, one supposes, at least with some degree of accuracy, the actual condition. The spiritual problem arises that this is utterly false, because what is here is inconceivable. So the normal human mode of describing it, thinking about it, parsing it, thinking in terms of the ways we've all been educated and brainwashed in terms of what things are, what matter is, what beings are, what society is, all of these various things that we've all been steeped in are intrinsically wrong, intrinsically in error. And because of the disjunction between what one thinks oneself and one's situation to be and what is the actual situation is, from that arises the spiritual dilemma of suffering, frustration, difficulty, unsatisfactoriness, pain, worry, anxiety, all the rest of it that we're so familiar with. Now, the other aspect of theory, it happens that reality itself, as it actually is in fact always present. It's always available. It's always completely being engaged with. So this enables the possibility of studying this, the possibility of noticing this, and learning to appreciate its nature as it actually is, outside the context of what we are in the habit of holding it to be. So this is wonderful. So there's an opportunity, there's a possibility of correcting the inaccuracy, the inaccurate, intrinsically inaccurate worldview and self-definition that one normally holds in favor of the actual condition, the actual nature, which is available, which is clearly displayed, and is very clearly discoverable. And even better yet, it happens that this is both easy and fun to do. What could be better news? So that's the main elements of the theory of practice. Now, for the practice of practice, it's very easy. It happens that your experience is reality. Your experience is made of, it consists solely of, and nothing whatsoever other than actuality itself, reality itself. So you are always immersed in the naked presence of reality, of what this actually is, which happens to be what is considered to be divine, what is considered to be transcendental, what is considered to be the absolute, and so on and so forth, from various perspectives. But all that hyperbole aside, here it is. You're already seeing it. You already are it entirely. And so it's relatively easy to notice that fact and participate in it. The simplest way to put the most effective means of practice is to let yourself feel the presence of your experience, feel the texture of your experience. Just feel what it is and notice the way in which it is entirely, the nuances and subtleties in the very nature of what it is entirely undescribable, entirely beyond being able to collapse down to an accurate description this way or that. And in this context, it becomes very clear that all of our descriptions are very rough approximations, very rough designations that censor very heavy-handedly and leave out an enormous amount of the detail and nuance that our experience actually consists of. And so the trick of it is to notice that nuance. And in fact, we always are noticing the nuance. the subtlety of flavor, the subtlety of color, the subtlety of thought, the subtlety of emotion, the subtlety of sensation, the bottomless, infinite nuance and detail and precision, and the instantaneous nature of it. Another interesting aspect of reality is that it has absolutely, the conditions that present themselves have absolutely no stability, absolutely no persistence. Any condition that you experience at any moment is already gone in that moment and is already morphed into something else. So simply noticing the stream of consciousness, just lie back and daydream and feel the stream of consciousness, what have you. And you'll notice right away the attention just drifts and morphs into all of these various nuances and subtleties that are absolutely, there's no way you could possibly capture that or collapse it down into a clear narration that's comprehensive and that is inclusive, that includes all the nuance and the detail. So through these kinds of repeated immersions and experiments, one comes to discover that experience, your experience, is utterly beyond description, utterly beyond resolving precisely as to be this or that. It is precisely itself, it is precisely the way that it is that, and yet what that is vast and inconceivable and essentially mysterious, even though it's so obvious and even though you're so completely familiar with it. Nonetheless, it's a mystery, precisely what it is and precisely how it is now. Another very interesting quality of this actuality is it's absolutely inclusive. As you settle into feeling the presence and the texture of your experience, you'll notice there's no demarcations, there's no parts, there's no divisions. Everything is this. You cannot find a separate you, you cannot find a separate world. Notions of objectivity or materiality or mentality or all these various qualifications that we're all so familiar with reveal themselves as arbitrary and essentially meaningless, because no such demarcations can be found clearly within experience when one observes it as it actually is. So this is one thing. What is here, the presence that is here, the actuality that is here, is one thing. It is the world. Sure, it is you. Sure, it is all of humanity. Sure, it is the solar system. Sure, it is the galaxy. Sure, it is the universe. Sure. But all of those ways of designating and parsing it as this and that and orders of scale and all that are very heavy-handed, very arbitrary artificialities that are being imposed on something that is essentially continuous, that is essentially without clear demarcation. Now, of course, this is complicated, or let's say potentially confused by another aspect of the nature of this actuality, that it presents itself as infinitely differentiated within itself. So anywhere you look whatsoever within the experiential field, you will find difference of quality and characteristic to anywhere you look, anywhere else you look whatsoever within the experiential field. Any portion of your visual field is different from any other portion of your visual field in the instant, and in the next instant, any portion of your visual field is even different from itself, because it's changed, it's morphed. You notice something else has come to the forefront. So there's this absolute, instantaneous discontinuity and differentiation within this field. And yet, paradoxically and very peculiarly, very strangely, very mysteriously, all this differentiation, all this apparent and very blatantly obvious differentiation is one thing. It doesn't depart from itself. It is simply your experiential field. It comes and goes as a unity. When you close your eyes, the visual field doesn't disappear in bits and pieces and sections. All of it just bang, it just gets shut off and then bang. It comes and goes as a whole. When you go to sleep, the waking world doesn't disappear in sections or segments, right? The whole entire thing just sort of shuts down and morphs into the sleepscape of the more amorphous qualities and so on and so forth. So anywhere you look and experience, you essentially find the same thing. You find nothing other than experience itself. And yet it presents itself with this astounding, this staggering differentiation of information. You know, the degree of differentiation is literally inconceivable. And yet every single bit of it, every single portion of it is instantaneously present, clear, available. It's not like your intelligence, when you're experiencing, has to say, okay, wait a minute, hold the phone, stop, I need to, okay, I see that, now let me see that, now let me see, it's not like you need to cumulatively add it up or somehow, address it all in series until you get the whole thing. It's not like that, is it? Instantaneously, bang! It's all right here, it's all being clearly perceived in experience, isn't it? So this one essentially unified field is always present as the field of your experience. And of course, as we were talking about lightly, we'll go in and out of the details of all this at enormous length, no doubt, during the course of this few days. But this is just an overview. And if you look at this, if you look at your experience and just feel the way it's present, relax and feel the texture of it. Feeling the texture of it's a nice way to be with it because it intrinsically bypasses conceptual thought. Texture is something that is very difficult to parse into a concept. Or say flavor, the flavor of your experience. What's the flavor of life? What's the flavor of color? So by approaching it with a sort of a koan-like oblique orientation like that, it naturally tends to bypass your conscious thought to an extent, and naturally tends to minimize the urge to be thinking about it, be trying to analyze it and parse it into a description or a narration that, of course, you can then think about or discuss with your friends or write an essay on. and all of the richness and the nature and the slipperiness and the transcendental nature of what this is becomes very clearly and very readily apparent, and simply by letting yourself notice this from time to time. And let me back up a little bit. And of course, this is nothing new. You've been experiencing your experience all the time, forever, as far as you know, right? You're very familiar with it. This is not something you need to learn how to do. You're very skilled, you're very intimate with this experiential presence. So it's simply a matter of giving yourself permission to just relax into it as a feeling, as a flow, as a lightness. And simply doing this will have a tendency to re-educate you in terms of your habitual orientation to this. Because of our enculturation, because of our, we're bombarded continually with semantic involvement. We're reading things on our computers, and we're talking to people, and things are going on, and all these words are being thrown at us, and so there's in terms of typical human society, there's a seductive, enforced bombardment of immersion in the normal human semantic mode, which reinforces the implicit consensus reality that whole semantic structure implies, that is, as I'm saying, and as is readily discoverable, entirely inaccurate. So this is kind of like equal time. It gives you, you're giving yourself permission to be with your experience outside of that context in an open-ended way, just to let yourself feel what it is. And this open-ended exploration will have a tendency to re-educate your orientation to your energy presence. Instead of the knee-jerk reaction to go into thought, to go into analysis, to go into a narration where you're describing things to yourself and describing things to people and so on and so forth, you will sort of be opening the door to a more easy access to the irrational, the indescribable, the non-linear, which your experience intrinsically consists of. And its nature and the way it is very, very clear. It's very, very obvious. So this is not even something that demands much subtlety. Simply feeling the slippery and yet completely actual presence of experience reveals it very transparently and very clearly what it is. And simply this refamiliarization with this mode of one's experience outside of a context of purpose, outside of a context of a goal. I mean, many of us who are artists or poets or painters or something are very familiar with doing this kind of a mode all the time. But frequently in those contexts there may be some kind of a target or a goal that's re-immersed in a more describable. You're not just painting. You're creating a painting, and maybe people will like it, and maybe you're going to show it, and maybe this and maybe that. And so all of a sudden you're back in a world of narration. Whereas just feeling the presence of experience, it has no target, it has no goal, it has no end, it has no beginning. It's just this that is here, the way that it is here. So this very simple exploration is profoundly powerful. Don't underestimate how powerful this very simple engagement can be. And of course the trick is to let yourself do it. First of all, appreciating that it's powerful is a big step, because most of us discount our experience. I think most of us are, put all the weight of our importance on our narrative and what we describe and so on and so forth, and think of experience as just a given, a sort of a basis for all of that elaboration and all of that narration that we're so invested in, all these games we're playing and all these goals we have and all of these various engagements we think we have. Whereas this that is just here is just sort of the context of that, the basic field within which all that arises. And I think there's an inherent tendency to downplay and de-emphasize its importance. But in actuality, it's exactly the other way around. Simply this amorphous transcendental presence in actuality the experience consists of is where the power is, where the meaning is, where the value is, and most importantly, from the spiritual point of view, it's where liberation is. When one acclimatizes oneself and discovers what this actually is, because it's self-verifyingly communicates itself, it's self-verifyingly reveals itself. When one discovers that this is the case, that this is actually what it is, and is actually the way it is, and that it is comprehensively and inclusively that, you are this, all of reality is this, inclusive, it's all right here, right now, and it's what you are, it's what this is. Not theoretically, but actually, as a concrete, factual presence. And it already was that, it always has been that, it's never been anything else. But you can come to see this very clearly and very self-verifyingly. And the implication of that is what has been called liberation. Because you'll discover you're free of causality, you're free of success and failure. You'll even discover you're free of life and death. Because the nature of what this is, that the nature of what you are, is absolutely astounding. What am I missing? Well, that's a very rough overview of the theory of the practice and the practice of the practice. As for the theory, The theory is what I call radiant presence. I started off by saying it can't be talked about, so let's talk about it anyway. So, the theory of reality is this. The theory of reality is reality itself. which is very simple, because fortunately it already is what it is, and it completely reveals itself and communicates itself. Oh, another very profound aspect of all this that very quickly becomes apparent to this kind of an exploration is the ubiquitous intelligence that this consists of. Intelligence is not something that we apply to it, that we have to muster or we have to create in our brains, or as a process of neurons firing. Intelligence is the intrinsic structural functionality of reality itself. All of these amazing functional systems spontaneously appear. Atoms, galaxies, life forms, societies. How does that happen? What's doing that? It's the intrinsic, you could say, functionally fractal, harmonic, hyper-intelligent nature of this energy, what I call the radiance, that this consists of, that's inherently and spontaneously shows up that way. And your intelligence and your ability to be intelligent, your ability to think, your ability to function, and so on and so forth, is nothing other than this intelligence. You haven't created it. You aren't doing it. On the contrary, it's what you are. So of course it's available. And this very intrinsic intelligence is you might say, the engaging principle that affects the power of this yoga. Because by simply feeling your experience, what is feeling your experience is this intrinsic hyperintelligence, because that's always what's been feeling your experience. And what is being felt is exactly the same intrinsic hyperintelligence, because that's all that there is to feel. In fact, when you quickly discover that you experiencing your experience is actually this experiencing itself, this engaging with itself. Reality is actually entirely a self-engagement. God is the ultimate narcissist, you could say. God is completely intoxicated in love with itself, and this is the dance of that love, your experience. And all of that is, that poetry is very nice and all that. But the actuality, the concrete actuality of that is here as your experiential field, and the precise nature of that is available for discovery, very simply and very easily. What else? Southern intelligence. I should really formulate a platform so I remember what I'm talking about. Okay, let's talk about nuance. Let's talk about qualities. Another aspect of the way that this is so bewildering, and in many Indian religious philosophies, this principle is addressed as Maya, and what this refers to is the strange nature of what this is. Even though it's unresolvable, it presents with an infinite degree of nuance, an infinite degree of implication, where it seems to be this way and seems to be that way. And each of these seemings is actually what we base our assumptions of resolution on. But even though it seems to be all these qualities, it does not actually resolve to that. It actually is beyond any of these qualities. So reality is very much like a Rorschach blot. In psychology, where they'll make a random ink blot on a piece of paper or something, and the psychologist will have you look at it, and instantly there's all of these free associations that arise, all these implications. Oh, it looks like a lion, or it looks like a gun, or it looks like my mother yelling at me, or it looks like this, or it looks like that. But it's none of those things. It's just a damn ink blot. And reality is very much like that. all of the things this seems to be and all of the qualities that this seems to look like actually are not present. And this is very strangely discoverable in this investigation. When one begins this investigation, one will sort of relax into feeling the texture and feeling the presence of experience. And of course you'll notice all of these various qualities sort of rising to the forefront loosely and very dynamically, as we're all very familiar with. But when you begin to look a little closer, you'll begin to notice that every one of these things, every one of these qualities that appear is more an implication of the quality. And if you look at what's actually appearing, it's not that. It's somehow beyond that. And then in that deeper inquiry, that somehow beyond may sort of resolve itself into another implication. And then you look at that implication, but no, it's not that either. It's somehow beyond that. And so there's this endless fractal recursion as one investigates this, and it seems to be this, and it seems to be that, and it seems to be this, and it seems to be that. But it never actually arrives at what it is. Never. That doesn't happen. So this is a very strange principle. So there's all of this implication, all of these seemings. And we're very familiar with this because all of these qualities, these seemings and implications, are what we take to be actual qualities. But they aren't. And the nature of this inquiry is to discover directly, experientially, that is the case. And one discovers for oneself that all of these qualities are not actually present in the way they seem to be. They're strangely beyond that. They're strangely other than what they seem to be. And in this otherness, one discovers open-endedness, emptiness, what the Buddhists call emptiness. One discovers transcendentality, because none of these qualities actually are that. They seem to be that. They strongly imply that, but then when you look, somehow it doesn't resolve to that, it doesn't settle into that. And this principle is absolutely universal, it's inviolable. Nothing can be found, nothing can be resolved. You never get to the bottom of precisely what anything is, even as you're bombarded by this infinite barrage of implications. And normally in our normal human function, in the normal human mode, we settle for these implications very happily, and we have names for all of them. We have colors and we have qualities. I'm happy, I'm sad. I'm this, I'm that. We can have even more elaborated and precise qualifications of all these different names and designations of all of these apparent characteristics. But if anyone takes the trouble to look closer at the experience of what these actually are, one discovers this very strange phenomenon that they are beyond, every quality is beyond what it seems to be at first. Even very blatantly obvious things like color. You look at color and this is a black sweater, this is a reddish cup. It's, okay, really, what color precisely is that? And if you look at that color and spend time with that color, after a while, you'll think someone dosed you with LSD or something. You'll be like, wow, I'm seeing color, but what is it? And right away, experientially, you will discover this unresolvability that these characteristics, these qualities, don't actually stabilize and cohere into a simple whole. On the contrary, as one experiences them, they diverge and open into variation and subtlety and complexity without end. The simplistic idea of let's say analysis or of trying to resolve what something is, the closer you study it, the more precisely you know what it is. Experience is not actually like that. It's exactly precisely the opposite. Experience does not converge into resolution as one looks at it closely and intelligently, without bias. On the contrary, it diverges, it opens up into incoherence, which is very strange because the result is that your experience is most coherent when you aren't looking at it very closely. which again we're all very familiar with because this is the normal human mode. Things just seem to be exactly what they are, and it's all very stable and solid. And here we are, and it's a Saturday morning, and we're at this talk, and we're sitting here, and there's a pool outside, and all this stuff, right? It's like, okay, you're not looking closely. Look more closely. Look at the experiential field and notice how slippery it is, how weird it is, how rich it is, and especially how that richness does not resolve or cohere into stability or into coherence, but on the contrary, continually opens up and dances into incoherence and into variation and into more ever increasing nuance and ever increasing subtlety and qualities. And this is it's kind of a counterintuitive result in terms of the normal human mode, even scientific mode. Well, scientific method supposes perhaps that, well, if we look at it really closely, we'll pin down more accurately what it is. And yet, look at science. They keep looking closer and closer, and they find, well, it's not what we thought it is, but it's really, really different. Back 200 years ago, oh, this is matter. And then quantum physics comes along in the early part of the 20th century. And, well, actually, it's kind of not matter. It's actually this field of atomic particles and atoms, and then the quantum mechanics is developing. Well, it's not even particles; it's probabilities of particles. And then you get quantum entanglement, where a particle that's here is actually everywhere else too. And so, where did the matter go? Well, it's still matter; it's still this right here. But what is it? And science may or may not acknowledge this, but I prophesy that this trend in science will continue infinitely, forever. There will always be new cutting-edge discovery, new cutting-edge theory that will completely undercut the previous version until the next one, forever and forever and forever, because of this simple principle that actuality does not resolve. Actuality does not converge into simplicity, into wholeness. In Buddhism, this is a very central principle. They call it emptiness. All dharmas are empty of self-nature, and so on and so forth. And what they're referring to is exactly this principle that no experiential reality has any ultimate coherence, can be precisely determined as to exactly what it is. And again, not theoretically, but experientially. This is not a lot of philosophers arguing at each other. This is the simple fact of the obvious and empirical nature of your experience. And if you take the trouble to look, you will discover very quickly and easily that this is so. Another, probably the most delightful aspect of the practice of this kind of an investigation is it's fun. It's really fun. It's really cool. You look at your experience and like, wow, it's really entertaining. It's interesting. It's exciting. It's very vitalizing to discover, to notice, wow, my experience has all of these hidden depths that I was always bored. I would be sitting here and thinking, oh, well, this is just, here I am sitting here, what am I going to do, But then you just sit and look at experience, and it's just this it's like a science fiction movie or something, this endless morphing and moving in and out of implications of different dimensions, and just endless variety and exploration, and all of it meaningful, all of it profound, all of it full, pregnant with intelligence. So it's so luscious. So that's another delightful byproduct of realization as a yogi, is you'll never get bored in the doctor's office again. You'll be able to sit in the waiting room for 4 hours staring at the wall, and you'll be happy as a pig in shit. So anyway, so that's. I feel like I've covered everything I want to cover. I'm sure more stuff will come up as we digress. So I am available to discuss any and all of this. I strongly urge you during the course of this weekend to, rather than just sitting and listening, to speak up and engage and talk about your perspective on things and things that are issues for you. Because that kind of an engagement you may find to be the most provocative and the most effective sort of a use of this time. It's unexplainable. It's completely unexplainable. Things seem to be a certain way from a certain perspective, and there are infinite perspectives. And from each perspective it seems to be different. And from the same perspective in the next moment it seems to be different. And yet there's this astounding sort of a synchronistic alignment of things, right? I mean, we don't need to worry about the room all of a sudden exploding or turning into a cloud or whatever. The room seems to be pretty consistently the room. It seems to be pretty much not going anywhere, notwithstanding the fact that the experience of it is actually varying continually and unrepeatingly every instant. This is a strange fact. It's very peculiar. It's an aspect of the intelligence. You may recall I referred to the inherent intelligence as functional structurality. So it seems to present itself as all of this apparent structurality or patterning that seems to be very functional. In other words, seems to form itself into entities and subgroupings that seem to have functional capabilities in alignment with various other functional structuralities and so on. So the room seems to present itself as a structural functionality, and your body seems to present itself as a structural functionality, in the chair, and so on and so forth. And yet, if you look very closely at what the experience of all these is made of, you find this very strange condition of unresolvability. So all that is made of that. It's rather analogous to the situation of modern physics, where this is a chair and it's made of matter, but it's actually probability fields that are, spread throughout the universe or something. Or this bizarre, phenomena that they're discovering. And these bizarre phenomena, they're measuring them in the lab. This isn't just this weird theory by these wacky physicists. They're actually doing the math, literally. So this is always a very curious paradoxical nature. This is, in one sense, nothing at all, and yet in another sense it's all this. And what's up with that? And that question has no answer. And yet it is quite clear that it is like that. So that's just another aspect of this exploration. An interesting aspect of reality, of actuality, is that no perspective of it is negated by any other perspective. So it's not like when you discover, for example, suppose you really go the distance and discover you're not a human being. You discover you are this entire transcendental field of presence. But the human doesn't necessarily go anywhere. It doesn't get negated. You'll still be able to go into Starbucks and order a cup of coffee. So it's this very strange coexistence and juxtaposition of radically different paradigms, you might say, that don't negate each other, cancel each other out, and yet essentially have nothing to do with each other. But that's what we have. That's what this is made of. That's the very essence of unresolvability, is this infinity of perspectives, each with its own kind of pseudo-coherence from its point of view, that don't actually have anything to do with each other, but they don't negate each other either. They don't cancel each other out. They strangely coexist, and it's almost as if there was some kind of infinite multidimensionality, and within each dimension a certain thing was dominant or true, predominantly within that context. But anyway, since it's unresolvable, you can't get to the bottom of it anyway, so it's a moot point. But it's clear that it's like that. And this is not about denying anything. This is about seeing what is actually present in the way that it's present. And certainly that is very obviously present. We're all very familiar with it. This amazing structural functionality of all of these, present patterns that are so much themselves and so partake functionally of their own nature. Perhaps the most obviously weird thing about this actuality that we find ourselves in, is how slippery it is, how it can seem to present with such an infinitely broad range of implications and perspectives. And yet it's absolutely inclusive. All of its perspectives, all of its implications are it completely, and there's no hierarchy really of the degree to which they are this. So, of course, most human beings are very familiar with the condition that is often defined as being confusion or delusion or what have you, which of course is a perfectly viable implication and perspective of the way that this is. It's intrinsic, it's inherent. It's not an alien condition grafted on that somehow gets in the way of something. It is this itself. Every aspect of what that is this itself. This is doing it, it's made of this, it is perceived by this, and it is in fact a viable perspective on this. And all perspectives are viable. There's no truer perspective. Realizing what this is, which of course is the fabled goal of spirituality, if there is one, does not consist of the discovery of or adopting some superior perspective that's truer than the other perspectives. On the contrary, it is the clear and obvious perception that no perspective is true completely from within its own context, from within its own gamut, from within its own range of implication. So it's not so much, a lot of the sort of pop spiritual nomenclature has an erroneous implication. It's not a matter of waking up. It's a matter of noticing that it dreams eternally, and the way in which it dreams itself has no limits, no definable range, no discoverable boundaries, and yet all of that is this. This is that. This is its mode. This is its nature to be that way. So there is no truth versus untruth. The truth is that this continually presents itself as partialities, infinitely, unendingly. Which of course should come as no surprise, because that's what the experience of everyone, I presume, and certainly my experience. But this slipperiness, this unresolvability that is so apparent if one takes a moment to look at one's experience with anything more than dull superficiality, one discovers that this quite obvious condition of this presentation of a barrage of information which seems to resolve itself into some kind of a pseudo-coherent range of coherence. But of course, again, if you look closely, you discover that this coherence does not really hold up. The dots are not really connected. It's all sort of left hanging and left loose and left as a vague innuendo and implication. And then if you look closer, you may discover another equally vague and elusive innuendo and implication. In fact, you don't even have to look very close, because whatever you're looking at is going to instantly morph into something else anyway. There being no findable stability or coherence, or coherent sequence of transfer of one coherent framework of morphing into another coherent framework that follows on the first one. There's actually no following. It doesn't take very much observation to notice that every perspective sort of stands on its own pseudo internal justification, internal verification, but it does not stand up to scrutiny. And then instantly whatever it morphs into is exactly the same essential characteristic, essential unreliable, unfindable, unprovable veridity. And of course this is the absolutely consistent condition. It's consistently inconsistent, one might argue, but wordplay aside, this basic point that it's not a question of getting from untruth to truth. It's a question of discovering that truth itself presents as dreams and illusions and perspectives of relative degrees of pseudo-truth that are essentially untrue, in terms of their accuracy and comprehensiveness. Everything is real, but not in the way that it seems to be. So, which seems, at first glance, seems like a nice, broad, simple way of approaching this, but it gets infinitely subtle because it's always a razor-sharp yin-yang, a razor-sharp paradox of both. So basically, actuality presents seeming to be various certain ways. There can seem to be all sorts of organizational principles that may seem to apply at any given level or bardo of experiencing. For example, in the waking world there may seem to be cause and effect, there may seem to be space and time. And these are examples of ways that it seems to be. And these ways are inaccurate. They are not true. It's not actually like that. Let's go to the example of a dream. A dream is a perfect example. In a dream, everything that appears is real. It's a real, actual presentation, but it's not the way it seems to be. You're not actually existing in the space that the dream seems to be appearing as. You're not actually none of the things that seem to be appearing in front of you are actually there in the sense. And yet, it's all real because it is all a real presentation of reality, of actuality, of radiant presence. So it's easy, in terms of reality and unreality, it's very easy to try to make blanket exclusions. It's easy to say, no, this isn't real, or this is, false, or something like that. These heavy-handed qualifications, heavy-handed, trying to put things into one camp or another. And and this is liable to be a grounds for enormous confusion unless you do it precisely, unless you see the way in which this is actually so. There's one principle that causes all problems, all suffering, and the same principle, not surprisingly, is the basis for freedom from problems and suffering. This principle is, of course, thinking you know what anything is, the fantasy of resolvability, the fantasy of definability. Problems consist of definition. I'm Peter Brown, I'm a human being, I'm stuck in my life, I have all these problems, X, Y, Z, and I can list them and define them and talk about them at great length. And the solution to this, the essence of yoga, is to look at the elements that supposedly these problems consist of, and discover the way in which experientially every single one of them transcends and is beyond the way they're being defined to be. So therefore these definitions are inaccurate. And this is not done philosophically or through argument or through conceiving it to be so. This is done through looking at one's experience and discovering, noticing that the actual content of experience, the actual information that is present as experience, is beyond resolving as being precisely one way or another way. It may have dominant elements that imply a certain definition, but in fact it also has many, 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 literally infinite other elements which deviate from that, which move in other directions. So it's a very simple point, but it's a point that is a sticking point, because for it to be effective, one has to follow it all the way down. One can look superficially at how, obviously most of the elements that my self-image and my psychological self-image, my definition of myself and my life, my definition of myself as a social presence and all these various things, as a social role, all these are obviously gross oversimplifications, which means that the reality is beyond what I'm holding it to be, and in unknown ways, perhaps ways that are really useful and powerful and would remedy the faults that I'm imagining are present in the situation. But the specifics of that is irrelevant, because, of course, the qualities that are present in an experience that are beyond the way that experience is being defined to be are themselves also undefinable. So it's not like I've got a definition wrong and there's a better definition out there and I'm going to find it and then that'll solve the problem. It's not like that. It's that any definition is not verified by the facts, the fact of experience, the fact of what experience actually consists of. This is a very, very simple point. It's a very, very simple principle. And the entirety of spirituality, the entirety of actual yoga, it really is addressing this point from various angles. The actuality is, you live in the world of Schrodinger's cat. You are not alive, you are not dead. You are not you are not you. You are not this, you are not that. You're a question mark. You're not nothing. It's not that you're negated. It's not that you're nothing. On the contrary, you're an embarrassment of unresolvable information. You're and when I say you, I refer to not just to you as an entity, but also to every aspect whatsoever of your supposed experiential field and your environment and your circumstances and your history and so on and so forth. Anything whatsoever that you could try to define as being a certain way, as being something. So the actuality is as I say, is the reality of what you are, the reality of what your world is Schrodinger's cat. It's not alive, it's not dead. It's not successful, it's not unsuccessful. It's not liberated, it's not in bondage. It's not this, it's not that. You can't say what it is, because of course as soon as you say what it is, you're resolving it, you're defining it. Even in some exalted or fabulous or inclusive mode, it still is too much. And so to be with this degree of looseness, to be with this degree of delicacy is a real art. Especially since this openness, this undefinability, does not preclude the presence of defining. Obviously, the mind is continually churning away, continually saying, oh, this is this and that's that, and no, I have to do this today, and boy, I hate so-and-so, and I'm really annoyed by this or that, or I really hope for such and such. So all of that's going on, but that itself, what that is also, of course, unresolvable. All of its pretended resolutions are themselves unresolvable. So the entire thing is made of question marks. All of these assertions, all of these, these claims and these definings and these strategizings that go on in the mentality are all built of question marks. And it's impossible to build an exclamation point out of a question mark. And, the point is, again, that this is not abstractly so. This is not philosophically or theoretically so, although it is that in fact. But the powerful fact is this is experientially so. You can look for yourself and see very clearly and self-verifyingly the way that this is so. And in so doing, ultimately and progressively perhaps, you will discover yourself free of the implications of all of these definitions that people are typically in the habit of postering and stickering all over their experience. You can think of definitions as like captions of a photo. Like on Facebook, if you go to Facebook or one of the social media sites, someone will have a picture of Obama looking pissed off or something, and then they'll have plastered a caption on it as if the caption is actually defines what's going on in the picture, which is absurd because, of course, they just went to the file photos of Obama, and they have a billion photos to choose from, and they pick one that they can try to make something out of and make an implication that it supports their argument or their thing they're trying to assert. So it's all total bullshit. It's all total fabrication. And basically the way the defining principle of mind works is similarly bullshit and fabrication, because it creates these captions that it posts upon the actual experiential images that appear, and then claims that the captions are accurate or in some kind of context, but in fact they aren't. It's an impossibility. In a sense, this is a very, very simple point, but it's the point. It's the important point. It's the powerful point. It's the profound point. This very simple, essential point is what liberation hinges on. And liberation is an actuality. It's not just a pie in the sky. It's not just a, join my cult and send me money kind of a scam. As it's often used for, perhaps. But one can discover for oneself, if one looks at one's experience, that one is living in a dream, that one is made of dream, that this is, and this is actually self-verifyingly factual, self-verifyingly the case. So this is the point of all this. This is not just the essence of the yoga, this yoga that I present, but the entirety of it. And any other aspect or is just an aspect or a detail or a perspective on this point, on this fact, this condition, which is the ongoing nature of consciousness to proliferate, generate all these definitions of what it's experiencing, and the actual, empirical, objective fact that none of these definitions can be accurate, can capture what is being experienced. So, of course, in spirituality, the overall strategy, the overall battle plan is really quite simple. First of all, by exploration, discover what this is. And then once you have discovered what this is, then explore the way that it comprehends it, how comprehensively inclusive it is, how there's nothing that is omitted, there's no remainder in the equation, so to speak. There's nothing left over, there's nothing that's not. There's no sacred spirituality and then the world sort of left in the dust down on the side. It all comes with it, it's all included. And this is all, of course, the laboratory for this investigation is the field of your own experience. You look at this and explore this artfully and sensitively until you discover what this is, and then notice the way that's inclusive, absolutely comprehensive. Of course, there are several complications, not the least of which is the absolute strangeness and weirdness of what this turns out to be. Probably the most challenging aspect of the nature of what this is, in terms of exploring it, is it never-endingly and with inconceivable overwhelming bounty completely bombards the experiential field with innuendo and suggestion and implication of what it might be and what might be going on. So in a certain sense, reality is waging a misinformation campaign. It's continually radiating and bombarding all sorts of implications, none of which are comprehensively it is, and yet all of which seemingly and convincingly seem to almost fit the bill. They almost look, this is real. It's kind of like this. Yeah, that's as actual. It's really sort of this way, and of course, none of that is actually the case. None of it is comprehensively what this is. What is showing up as all of this innuendo, as all of this seductive implication. I think that's a good word. And at first, of course, it can be easy to try to get beyond it, to try to see, all of this implication and innuendo is in the way of seeing what this is. But on the contrary, the implication and innuendo it's the very nature of what this is to continually be showing up as that. Just like it's the nature of dreaming to be continually showing up as dream. It's intrinsic creativity, it's apparent creativity or apparent showing up as something. The emperor never shows up naked, you might say. He's always got new clothes on. Continually, there's a quick change artist, continually new clothes every instant. And so far from that getting in the way of discovering what this is, that's of the very essence of discovering what this is. To discover the sense in which this is this astounding, weird, radiant actuality that continually projects apparent information, about itself, within itself, and assimilates and perceives and tries to correlate that information within its perceiving faculty, which is one with what it is. And it's like a game that the Absolute is playing with itself of, hide and seek. It's giving itself an embarrassing abundance of clues, and then trying to follow the clues and getting hopelessly befuddled by the clues and basically going around in circles that we're all very familiar with of our our own strategies and struggles and approaches to our lives. And this is the very nature of this actuality, that it is like that it does that it continually explores itself, it continually touches itself, it's continually gathering data points. It's like an insane, demented, overachieving scientific investigator that's going out and getting inconceivable amounts of data in real time about what's going on here, and correlating the data and drawing charts and connecting the dots and figuring it out and generating theories. And there's always new data being gathered, but none of the data, even though it's all actual in itself and it's all being done by actuality, and the perceiving and the correlating is being done by actuality, none of it comprehensively captures the actuality that's here. The actuality that's here, of course, is the whole system, so to speak. This whole nature that is exploring itself, that is looking at itself, that is never finding itself, because its very essence is unresolvable. And all this exploration, of course, can seduce one into the notion of resolvability, which is the pitfall. That's the sand trap in the golf course of spirituality. That's a good line. Is the fantasy of resolvability. We just see all of this innuendo, and then, oh yes, okay, great. It resolves into this, it resolves into that. Now I know what's going on. But of course, there is no resolvability, and so discovering unresolvability, the actuality of unresolvability, is the key to getting out of the sand trap. Is the key to avoiding this pitfall of getting sucked into the comprehensiveness of all of any of these viewpoints or theories or analytic images that the consciousness generates about what things are, what anything is. But unresolvability is, in fact, it's not an abstract principle. It's fortunately, it's an experiential, immediate actuality. So one can discover unresolvability very, very directly and very simply. And unresolvability blows the whole thing up. Because nothing can be any certain way, because you can't find out experientially the way that it is. And all of these seemings, when upon closer observation, are discovered to be just seemings. They're discovered to be like a movie set, where it's very convincing if you look at it from one angle, but you just look at a slightly different angle and you start seeing all the gaffer tape and chewing gum that's holding the thing together. All of these perspectives are partial. They are not comprehensive. They are not complete. They are not whole. And because of the experiential immediacy of unresolvability, this becomes palpable. It becomes immediately obvious, and all of a sudden, all of these, it's like going lucid in a dream. All of a sudden, all of these perspectives that are so convincing, they suggest themselves. But it's all a dream. Sure, there's all these perspectives, but it's all a dream. So it's not that it's the way it seems to be. It isn't that way. And just this unresolvability is the master key that unlocks that frees one from that. So by that argument, the recommendation would be to explore the nature of unresolvability and discover the actuality of it up close and personal for yourself immediately by looking at the way experience is. Never settles down into any configuration. I mean, that's speaking in terms of time, but that's speaking even in terms of any kinds of spatial configurations or any kinds of orientations. Everything is question marks. Everything is vague. Everything is fuzzy. Nothing is precise. Nothing is stably any particular way. So it cannot be resolved as being a particular way, even if the information at a particular time or from a particular perspective seems to strongly imply that it is that way. Because if you look closer, even in that instant, you'll discover that there's loopholes, and then, of course, in the next instant, it's all shifted, it's all different, and there's different perspectives and different innuendo and all of this. But, again, one doesn't need to even theorize about this or analyze it, because unresolvability is really experientially very, very immediate. It's the intrinsic fuzziness and instability of experience. Nothing is any particular way that you can pin down precisely, and nothing stays any particular way for a length of time that you can, for any length of time whatsoever, if there was such a thing as length of time. So, well, that's a good emphasis for today. So unresolvability is the master key. That'll unlock all of the padlocks in the supposed spiritual torture chamber. The simple fact is that what this is, what you are, is not what you think it is. It's not what it seems to be in terms of what you're used to understanding it to be. And so spiritual practice consists of simply investigating the way that this is so. Look and see the way in which your actual experience deviates from what you imagine you're experiencing and what you imagine your experience to be and the circumstances in which you find yourself to be. So this is very simple. As a rule of thumb, anything that seems to be a certain way that's at all specified whatsoever is not actually that way. So this is the opportunity to look and see the way in which your experience of what it actually is different than what you're used to thinking that it is. And this will show you, this will disprove your ideas of what you think things are, and reveal that they are different than that, and you will be able to see the way in which they are what they are. Although the nature of what this is happens to be such that you will not be able to form a new idea or a new understanding of the way things are, what things consist of, because they are not of a nature that allows that. Things are not graspable or engageable in terms of being, defined as being any particular way or any particular thing. Things are slippery and multidimensional. And of course, the point of all this is to look at your experience and notice the way that this is so, which will free you from all of the ways you're used to thinking you are and the ways you're used to thinking your circumstances are, which happens to be what causes all sense of problems, all sense of limitation or suffering. So it's very, very simple, although in practice it can become very nuanced and complex as one stumbles upon the subtle ways in which one holds things to be a certain way. So it can feel a little bit like peeling the layers of an onion as one proceeds. So anyhow, that is the entirety of what this is about. And then, of course, it gets more complex as we look into the specifics of, or as you look into the specifics of what your experience actually, how it seems to be presenting itself to you. So what's interesting in all of this, what's worthy of attention in all of this, is anything that seems to be a certain way, anything you seem to come up against that there seems to be a certain way. I mean, that may sound very general. Seems to be a certain way is sort of a, may seem to be a very vague phrase, but it's actually very specific. Anything that seems to actually be something or be a certain way that you can think of, that you can pretend you know what it is, it feels like it is that in a limited and specific and definable and certain way. That is what's interesting, because it is not actually like that. Nothing is actually like that. Experience is, in fact, is very dreamlike. And this is not theoretical or abstract, it's like that concretely. And so the point is to look at your experience and notice the way that this is so, and gradually all of the concretizing that the imagination, that the mind does, will fade away in relevance. It probably won't stop, but that doesn't need to stop. It just needs to not be believed in as being objectively true. So it's actually very simple, although, as I say, it may present as complex in terms of your actual engagement. Superficially, there are two ways in which experience seems to be normally interfaced with. The one way is the way of identification that we're all very familiar with. It basically consists of that which you would usually qualify as subjective. So your thoughts, the sensations of your body, your emotions, your motivations, your quandaries as you grapple with ways of dealing with situations in your life and apparent situations and so on and so forth. Is normally felt to be me. It's felt to be, this is me, this is my persona, this is my being, this is my whatever I am, my entity. And there is a second way in which experience is interfaced with, which is generally felt to be more or less other. So that which seems to constitute the environment, that which is present in experience but is not felt to be a part of what you ordinarily would identify with. And this is speaking in broad strokes for, suppose, some average human perspective in terms of consensus reality experiencing. This objective dimension of experience is felt to be out there, is felt to more or less be not me, is felt to be beyond my control, whereas the subjective pole is often felt to be somewhat in control. One can at least feel like one is trying to think one's thoughts, trying to steer one's emotions, trying to steer one's actions, and so on and so forth. Whereas the objective pole is characterized by just being there, it's just showing up. Just like these pictures that are on the wall, they just happen to be there. You didn't put them there. You don't know who put them there. You don't know why they put them there, other than the hopes of making enormous amounts of money. But that's all speculation. Or the floor, or the dirt that's on the floor. It's just there. It's a given. It's just showing up. Or the light that's shining in the door. Most people don't feel like they're doing that light. They feel like the light is just there. It's just an objective fact. It's a given. It's the environment. It's not me. Me is Peter Brown, and what am I doing here, and what am I thinking about, and what am I feeling, and what are my motivations, and how does my body feel, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're all very familiar with this. Obviously, it doesn't need a lot of elaboration. So this normal condition, this normal sense of a doubleness in experience of self and other, which we can speculate may be more or less the norm for your average person, is in fact the spiritual problem, is in fact the very difficulty that true spirituality, that yoga, attempts to address. So this is this sort of a doubleness that we can speculate or perhaps remember is more or less the way ordinary human mentality approaches experience. The true condition, the condition which yoga attempts to discover and explore and ultimately integrate with, is the way in which, and the fact that these two modes are actually one. They're actually the same thing. That they seem different and that they're held to be different and that they're felt to be different is a complete misunderstanding. It's a complete erroneous interpretation that the intelligence in its power can generate seamlessly, relatively, and convincingly, and virtualize it as if it was the case. So that for the average person, if you told them you're the objective pole just as much as the subjective pole, you're the sun just as much as your thoughts or your body or something, they would look at you and think you're nuts or something, perhaps. So discovering, exploring, and ultimately integrating with the way that this is so is yoga. And the discovery that this is so is realization or enlightenment or what have you. You can throw all sorts of fancy notions at it, but it is what it is. And it's both less grand and far more grand than can possibly be said. So, in terms of discussing it superficially, or just looking at it in terms of discussion, it's fairly easy to understand conceptually, or perhaps intuitively, the way that this is so. For example, take the example of a dream. In a dream, if you're lost in the dream, normal dreaming, you find yourself in some apparent circumstances or environment, and you try to function or orient yourself or work within this apparent situation in whatever way seems appropriate. And you may struggle with things, or may succeed or fail with things, or may go about things with more or less, at least fundamentally more or less as you would in the waking world, although things may seem to be more flexible and so on and so forth, obviously. And in the dream, you think that the entity that is you in the dream is you, and is functioning and is struggling with these circumstances. And you may feel like the circumstances that are present in the dream are just there. They're an objective pole. They're just a given. They're not you. You're in a nightmare and there's some monster chasing you. The monster's definitely not you. And you want to get your ass away from there so he doesn't catch you and have his way with you or whatever the fantasy is. But consider, when you're dreaming, the dreaming, which is you, is doing all of it. The dreaming puts the monster that's chasing you there just as much as it puts the you that that's trying to run away from the monster there. No more, no less. The dreaming puts the environment within which the monster is chasing you, or whatever. I mean, I'm using a silly example, but obviously that's irrelevant. The dreaming puts that there and is doing that completely, entirely, as thoroughly and no less thoroughly than it is doing you and your thoughts and emotions and whatever reactions you may seem to be having within the circumstances and the structure of the dream. Then if we consider waking life, in waking life we like to pretend we're in control, or we'd like to be in control, or we're a little in control, or we're sort of doing ourselves, and sort of doing our thoughts, and sort of doing controlling our actions and all of that. But if one looks very closely, it's possible to notice, to discover that all of these conditions are basically just appearing. For example, even if suppose you are doing your thoughts and doing your struggling with things and trying to figure out the right way to do things and so on. Why are you motivated and oriented the way you are? Someone else would have a very different orientation. Where do you get your motivation from? Where do you get the pattern of your desires, the pattern of your urges from? They're given, they appear. Why are you? Why is someone else someone else? Why do you choose what you choose? Why do they choose what they choose? Did they decide to be that? Did they decide to have that character and have those motivations and urges? Or is it just a given? It's just proof, I didn't decide to be Peter Brown. And I mean, that's sort of regressing, trying to analyze it so even if you are doing your thinking, then the motivations of that, you aren't doing that. At some point you get to a point where it's quite clear and obvious that I'm not in control of my basic, urges, my basic drives. I like to avoid pain. Sure. Did I put that there? Could I stop it? Can I just say, okay, now I'm not going to try and avoid pain anymore? Good luck. So these things obviously are mysteriously present. They are given. They appear. And if one looks, if one looks more precisely at the train of thought, for example, which people who engage in serious meditation, for example, or have experience with extreme drug experiences and that sort of thing, or any various kinds of extreme experiences, will be more familiar with, the thoughts themselves, the ideas themselves, spontaneously appear, instantaneously, essentially out of nowhere, with zero stability. It's like and zero duration, and an inconceivable, disjointed and incoherent rainbow of implications and meanings and notions and inspiration. So the fantasy that one is thinking one's thoughts, or one is steering the train of one's thoughts, is very easily seen through if one places oneself in a orientation of noticing that is in fact the case. And the same with all other aspects of functioning. Now, this may be difficult to explore, typically because people are often so deeply entrenched in the essentially hypnotic frame of reference that I am me. Of course I'm doing my thoughts. Of course I'm doing my actions. I can put my hand up. I can put my hand down. Who else is doing it? I'm doing it because I want to do it. I mean, it's easy to see that and it's easy to say that. But in fact, if one looks very closely, it gets stranger than that. It doesn't actually resolve clearly to being that. And in fact, is not that gone. Not that it's not you. And now we're getting into an interesting aspect, which will be the next phase of the talk. But the you that it is the actual you. And if we go back to the dream analogy, in the dream you may feel like the you that is you is the entity that is struggling in the circumstances in the dream, or maybe not struggling, if you're lucky and having a fun dream. But in fact, the you that is you really is the dreamer. You're the dreamer. And the dreamer is, of course, dreaming the you that seems to be in the dream, that seems to be not doing the dream, just as much as it is dreaming the dream itself. So the real you is doing the you that feels like you in terms of consensus reality orientation, as well as everything else. So this is all you. Really, it really is all you. Or you are all it, you could say. I mean, there's no reason to personalize it, but there's no reason not to personalize it. Different philosophical approaches go to great extremes in terms of it's all not self or it's all self. But ultimately, those kinds of arguments, those kinds of distinctions are childish, because it is what it is, and it can certainly be described as all self and described as all not self, so it's just a matter of semantics ultimately, because it cannot be ultimately analyzed as to what it is. But that it is exactly and precisely what it is discoverable and is beyond dispute. And this is the nature of this yoga. Hey, I'm not staying. Give me the wrong coffee.
I have to tell. There's two of us. You do that.
Of course you are.
So, that is not yet. I'll talk probably most of the morning, and then we'll get into a no doubt spirited discussion. Or perhaps not so spirited, who knows. Now, a major aspect of the challenge in all of this is the flexibility and the power of intelligence. Intelligence powerfully can erect virtual scenarios that very strongly, convincingly seem to be various ways. And people that are skilled in brainwashing, no doubt, use and know and exploit this fact. But in actual fact, everyone is brainwashed, essentially. Everyone has been programmed. And the programming is insidious because typically one is not aware that that is the case, because of the incredible power and skill that the intelligence has in erecting these virtual scenarios. They seem self-verifying. They seem undeniable. They seem absolutely true. You know, if you went up to the average person on the street, perhaps, and said, You're all of this. You're not your body. Amen. So this amazing facility that the intelligence has with erecting these seemingly seamless virtual scenarios that seem self-verifying. Within the context of the scenario, it seems self-evident that the scenario is true, and any evidence or information to the contrary seems to be patently and obviously erroneous, wrong. So that factor is one of the major challenges in looking at this and exploring this. And another aspect of that, you might say the other side of the same coin, another aspect that becomes very challenging about exploring this is the nature of what this is, the nature of what is here, is very, very, very slippery. It does not resolve itself into simple and obvious apparent condition, which of course enables all of these sort of virtual scenarios that the imagination and that the intelligence generates. And since it is so flexible, since what is here is essentially the ultimate Rorschach blot, it can't say for sure that it's this or that, or that it's not this and not that, which is an ideal environment for the creation of arbitrary interpretations, because they're very hard to disprove, because the actuality is very squishy and very slippery and very essentially impossible to pin down as to exactly how it is. So part of this yoga, part of this exploration, is exploring the way in which that is so, the way and becoming very comfortable with slipperiness and unresolvability and multidimensionality, where conditions are not necessarily this or that, and they're not necessarily not this and not that. What they actually are is strangely multidimensional and strangely, pregnant with implication, but intrinsically not locking into any of the implications, which again is, of course, fodder for the imagination, which can take all of this soup of raw material and select arbitrary strands of it and bang, lock into that and create a virtual scenario. This is exactly what has happened with the creation of normalcy, with the creation of human beings inhabiting their bodies in the life in this big world that we all live in, society, and the horrible political situation we're in, and blah, 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 all the details of all that. None of it actually exists as such. It's actually not at all like that. But it's difficult to see the way in which that's the case. And this is, again, the essence of the practice of this yoga. So, where does that put us? That's always the question, and there's no answer to that question. But if I'm honest, if I really look, what the fuck is going on? What is here? What's happening? What is this? How is it? Where is it? There's no answer. But here it is. So it's here to explore, and an artful yogi, a skilled yogi, will explore it in the context of that non-answer, in the context of, because in that context you are engaged with the actuality of what it is without holding it to be this or that. And as soon as the intelligence holds it to be this or that, you're essentially lost in terms of the yoga is concerned. On the other side of the coin, it's inevitable that the intelligence will come in and hold it as this or that, because that's the nature of the intelligence. So there's this. It's not a simple either or of being in orientation or outside the context of a rigid orientation. So again, this is another area where the yogin has to develop flexibility of not wanting to lock it into not being an interpretation. Because of course, even interpretations aren't really interpretation. And the interpreting intelligence is never going to stop spitting out these virtual scenarios, and portions of the attention are never going to stop being seduced into them to explore them. But there's always a huge portion, perhaps the majority portion of the experiential field, which is in fact not a portion of these virtual realities that the imagination is trying so skillfully to sell. And this is the great opportunity for the yogi. Is the background of experience, the portions of experience that are sort of plain vanilla or floating at the periphery of focuses of attention, or boring and uninteresting, which actually constitutes the majority of the experiential field. Also, portions of experience which are less coherently structured, apparently. So, for example, when you're going to sleep, what are you experiencing? You're not experiencing anything particular. It's just it's nothing. It's not particularly coherent. It's not particularly formed or formal or structural. It's sort of an amorphous relative incoherence, but it's not nothing. And in that, for that fact, it is that ilk, that sort of range of experience, that ilk of experience, that portion of experience, which is sort of vague and unresolved and just weird, non-structural vibes, whatever, is a bonanza. It's a gold mine for the yogi, because here is a range of experience, a bandwidth of experience that lends itself less easily to the imaginations, to the intelligence's machinations of trying to resolve it into something, because it doesn't you can't build much with it. It doesn't have much structurality or coherence or persistence or duration. And it happens that, in fact, the majority, and just as speaking volumetrically, or speaking in terms of the proportion of the experiential field that is present, is more like that than is like structure. For example, even in your visual field, which for most humans is probably the dominant or orientational field of experience, there's a relatively small portion that's in focus at any given moment, and everything out here is vague and fuzzy, and you don't even know what it is. I mean, I can see colors and I can see shapes, but I can't really see what they are. So just even in my visual field, just looking in terms of the area of it, the superficial area of it, probably 80% of it is vague. It's not anything in particular. I mean, it's something, but it's squishy. It's not locked in very precisely to me this way or that way. Now, and of course, all the other sense fields apply to that too. But the real bonanza is when you start getting extrasensory, because the majority of our experience is not within the sense fields, in fact. The majority of our experience is vague vibes and flavors and innuendos, and you can't put words on it because the human language is oriented towards designating structures within the sense fields, basically. But much of experience is outside the sense fields, and typically we don't talk about it or think about it much or even know that it exists. Again, unless you're a tripper or a deep meditator or something like that, because it just doesn't attract your attention very much. It's like, well, there's nothing going on there. There's no action there. There's no soap opera there. Typically, the attention is drawn to some place where there's a story, where there's, what am I going to, wait a minute, this is fun. What am I going to get out of this? What am I annoyed with here? What's my orientation? What's the motivation of my character? It's all kind of the attention tends to be drawn towards these kinds of egoic involvements, strictly by habit. It's a habit, because that's what has seemed in the past, that's what has been held to be relevant, juicy, important, powerful. And in fact, it's a bill of goods, it isn't. From the point of view of yoga, exactly the opposite is the case. What's really powerful, what's really empowering, what's really liberating, and what's really the strongest actuality is the nature of experience outside of all of these structural orientations that the imagination fixates on as being a part of a game structure that it can get involved in and fight the good fight. So, that being the case, how to do the yoga in terms of practice? What do you do? Well, obviously, what you're doing is engaging with your experience. Of course, you're always engaging with your experience, so there's nothing new there. But rather than engaging with your experience habitually and automatically letting yourself being sucked into your favorite channels of your life story, think of the great and ongoing saga of you. You can look a little farther afield. You can start to look at the edges of your experience or in the cracks between these solid structures and so on and so forth, and begin to find aspects of experience that you don't know what they are. You don't really know how they are. But they're not nothing. And this is the powerful fact. When you go to say, just something simple, go to the edges of your vision. It's a very simple exercise. You don't need an altered state to do. You go to the edge of your vision where you can barely see anything. What's there? Well, it's not nothing, but I can't say what it is. It doesn't come into focus. But what is there? And again, there's no answer to that question. You ask the question, and there's no answer. So you be with that no answer, and feel the way it is what it is. This is the essential nature of practice of yoga and radiant presence. Is you feel what is present, and explore the nature of what it is without holding it to be or expecting it to resolve to being this way or that way. And you will discover that in fact, not only is this doable, but you will discover something there that is self-verifyingly powerful, vital, interesting, astounding, that is entirely beyond words to describe. And this is what you actually are. This is what this actually is. This is even what the machinations of your egoic investments actually are. And all of this is discoverable clearly, directly, and self-verifyingly, simply by looking, because it's right here. It's actually findable. Now, what makes this even easier is the fact you're already doing it. It's not like you need to learn to do something different. most of your experience is in fact already actively engaged with these amorphous, slippery, nonlinear dimensions of experience. It's already happening, and psychology or in pop psychology it might be called the unconscious. There's this vast portion of your actual experience where you're already dancing with these trans-dimensional energies. But the you that's doing it and the conditions within which it's being done are unthinkable. They're unspeakable. So, of course, we don't think about it and we don't speak about it in instant unconscious. And then there's this portion of this very small spotlight that is thinkable and is talkable about. And so consciousness goes to that. An interesting sort of an image for the way this works. You can imagine a vast, 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 vast warehouse that takes up like square miles, inconceivably vast. Maybe like that warehouse in Indiana Jones where the CIA stores all the alien technology or whatever. There's this vast warehouse that goes on just, for like thousands of miles, just inconceivably vast, but it's completely dark, has no lights in it whatsoever. And you've got a flashlight. And so you walk into this vast space. You don't even know it's a vast space because you can't see it's vast. You sort of hear it might be a little vast. And so you turn on your flashlight, and what do you get? Just one little thing's lit up. And all of a sudden you're very interested in what's in the flashlight, simply because that's all you can see. There's nothing else to be interested in. And this is very much the way consciousness, the way you, most average people, let's say, normally orient to their experience. We're just really fascinated by what's in that little flashlight beam. Me, my history, my friends, my enemies, my ambitions, my failures, my success. Is there any success? My failures. But all of that is just within this little beam, and all the rest of it is what? And you would say what, and there's no answer. What is it? Where is it? Because there's no light to see it, but it's not nothing. And this is the powerful field of the engagement of this yoga, is the portions of experience that is not known, but is in fact being known unconsciously, or let's say without holding it to be anything. Our conscious mode is not comfortable with things that aren't something or something else. The conscious mode wants to pin things down. It wants it to be this or that, or it wants it to be not this or not that. It wants something. Whereas this is like, what is it? No answer. How do you deal with no answer? But there's never been any answer. We can imagine when you were born, when you were 1 second old. What is it? What was it? Just, It's not even what the fuck, because you don't know about what's and you don't know about fucks. And it never stopped being that. It still is that. Although you've learned all these elaborate games you can play with yourself of being able to pretend to designate things and call things names and say, oh, this is a man, this is a woman, this is a floor, this is a bag, this is a sweater. It's like I'm like a trained monkey. I'm regurgitating words that I was taught to say when I was pointing at something which loosely approximated some notion of what the word is supposed to refer to, but it doesn't say what anything is. It doesn't say what it actually is or how it works, and that's never been. It's always been an open question. So in a way, this is just a reality check, and you've never stopped knowing that. Everyone always knows that they don't know anything. Everyone always knows that they've been faking it all their lives. This is the basis of insecurity. This is the basis of, Weltschmerz, of the stress and terror of being a human being, because you're not really, and you've been faking it. Because you remember, because you learned how to fake it when you were a child, and you have unconscious memories of having done that. you knew you didn't really know anything, but, mommy or daddy says, oh, that's a truck. And you go, huh? And say, that's a truck, huh? That's a truck. Truck? Yay, good boy! It's like, so you learn to regurgitate and spit back a call and response, which is meaningless, but you get big strokes for it.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is the essence of essentially all human conscious functioning. It's the essence of all, or let's say the lion's share of sense of social identity, sense of individuality, blah, 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 self-image, that stuff. But you've always known that it's not really like that. So which is actually a very powerful fact. That's not a problem. That's a solution, because it turns out that not knowing is powerful. Not knowing is empowering. Not knowing is revealing. And from the point of view of yoga, above all, not knowing is liberating. When you discover the unresolvability of what this actually is, of what you actually are, this turns out to be having struck the spiritual gold mine, the spiritual mother lode. That was kind of fun. I was sort of hoping I could take us someplace, and kind of felt good about that. So anyway, that's pretty much the whole schmear of yoga radiant presence, really, right there in a nutshell. I call it yoga of radiant presence, not completely arbitrarily, because it is a yoga, which means a process of engagement with actuality that ultimately can accomplish something. Or in this case, let's just, if you want to be technical, you can say it can appear to accomplish something. And it's radiant presence because what is here, this actuality that alone exists, that is indescribable and that is unanalyzable and that cannot be pinned down at all in terms of any aspect of what it is present. In other words, it's slippery and multidimensional, but it's actual. It's real. I mean, this shit is here. Here is here. Is. And so I use the word presence to try to indicate that, to try to sum up this fact of actuality. And I call it radiance because it unendingly and unceasingly and apparently intrinsically presents as a barrage of infinite appearing qualities. All of the flavors and vibes and colors and sounds and textures and, all this we don't have names for. You never find presence. The emperor never has no clothes. There's always an infinite range of qualities that are being presented, which, of course, in a certain sense, is the cause of all the problems, because that gives the radiance of all of these qualities gives the imagination the basis to create its fantasies and its stories of pain and suffering and insufficiency out of where none actually exists. The way that experience orients to itself, thanks so much, as we spoke at length around yesterday, is basically by interpretive frameworks. Now, most typically, these interpretive frameworks are engaged with unconsciously or essentially passively. So one is being jerked around by one's programming or the suggestions that are coming from outside you, and apparently within your experience, in terms of information, in terms of ideas. Now, the way that the intelligence orients within the experiential field is essentially through hypnosis. What this means is that the intelligence, some kind of a kernel of information becomes present to the intelligence, and the intelligence, if it's drawn to that, will try to actualize its idea, its interpretation of that information in imagination, which is essentially the mechanism of hypnosis. So in other words, if someone is talking about something, whether you like it or not, there will be at least some degree of a tendency of your imagination to generate a fantasy about what the information content that is being presented implies. This is the essential mechanism and technique of magic, which happens to be my area of expertise. Which is neither here nor there. Don't look at the man behind the curtain. But one can, rather than being merely the passive enactor of this mechanism, which is basically more or less unstoppable, because it's the nature of the inherent intelligence to do this, to seize upon these notions, kernels of information, and then virtually actualize them within its imagination. So rather than merely being the passive subject of these kinds of notions, which happens with conditioning and with brainwashing and with normal human functioning, where people have been conditioned to think things are a certain way and to think they're supposed to behave a certain way, and they more or less go along with it, so on and so forth. Perhaps. But one can use this mechanism more or less deliberately to navigate one's own experience. So you take advantage of this inherent urge of the intelligence to create these virtual, imaginary actualizations of information. And you do this, of course, by either feeding or placing yourself in a context where certain information will be presented. Your imagination will try and follow it. It will try and actualize it. It will generate a virtual scenario that will explore what it would be like to be if things were that way. For example, this weekend is a perfect example of this. Why did you come here? You came here in order to have, I suppose, in order to have certain information placed before you, and the mechanism that kicks in when this information is placed before you is your imagination latches onto this information and enacts this automatic cycle of virtualization, of creating a virtual version of of the information that's being present. There's two aspects of this that make this powerful. Number one, the inherent intelligence has to draw upon the actual nature of what this is, of what is here, of what it is, in order to create these scenarios. So, even though these scenarios are essentially imaginary, essentially enacted in imagination, they partake of actuality. They are made of actuality, and the flavor of actuality permeates them, you might say, loosely speaking. And the astute yogi might ask, but hey, this is just imagination, so what? It's this fantasy. But So it's not an actual orientation. But here's the secret. All orientations are fantasy. Wherever you think you are, whatever you think is going on, you're imagining that. The actuality is inconceivable. You can't possibly know where you are, and you can't possibly know what's happening. So any version that seems even remotely knowable is being virtualized by this process of essentially imagination. So this is using this process, more or less deliberately, for your intention, for your benefit, rather than merely being a slave to it, more or less, as may be more ordinarily the case. Now, everyone does this to some extent anyway already. Very few people are totally passive. Very few people are totally dupes of, their circumstances. But the notion that one can actually take advantage of this in a very, very powerful way is really the essence of spiritual practice. It's the essence of this exploration. So, for example, all day yesterday, we were talking together about all of these various aspects of the nature of experience and the nature of radiant presence and all of this. All of that, by talking about it, the intelligence follows along by creating an imaginary version of that in your experience that to some degree actualizes it for you. So you find some relevance there, you find some meaningfulness there, unless it's pure and total hogwash, in which case you're sort of being cast adrift and you probably won't get much juice out of it. But if the information that you're virtualizing resonates with the nature of actuality, it will tend to be more powerful and more useful in terms of this kind of inquiry, this kind of spiritual work of settling into integrating more accurately with what this actually is. So we do this all the time. If I'm suggesting, here's your field of vision, so right away there is no field of vision. As soon as I say, here's your field of vision, the inherent intelligence tries to go, it looks for something that it could think of as being a field of vision, and it finds something, and it says, okay, here's the field of vision. So that field of vision becomes virtually actualized to some degree within your imagination by orienting around the seed of that suggestion, the seed of the information of, look at your field of vision. And then I can say, look at the edge of your field of vision. And right away, the imagination tries to do that. So what would that mean? You can't know what it would mean, but the imagination tries to make something up. It tries to sort of create a virtual version of that it can then follow along. And this is the way basically all thought works. This is the way all all experience that feels internalized or that feels like you're doing it or you're engaged in it, this is the mechanism by which this happens. And so it's possible to use this principle to explore the range of what your experiential field is like. Now, in particular, in terms of yoga of radiant presence, the most useful use of this principle, generally speaking, is to use it to get outside of your normal orientation. Not that normalcy is bad or evil, but normalcy will have a tendency to be dull. And normalcy is actually being created in the same way. There's no such thing as normalcy. The imagination creates normalcy, it creates dullness, creates stuckness, creates whatever. I mean, not that it necessarily is doing exactly that, but to any degree that these conditions seem to be present, this is the mechanism by which that occurs. Because none of those conditions actually exist. No condition actually exists, in fact. So, since the problems are essentially created hypnotically, the solutions can be created hypnotically through navigating yourself beyond them and seeing what's there and exploring and playing with those apparent qualities of experience, all of which are essentially being fantasized by the imagination. But again, the fact that they are imaginary does not mean that they are unreal, and they are made of reality, and they are being done by reality, and so ultimately they reveal reality. All experience, all actuality is reality, is made of reality, is permeated by the nature of reality and reveals it. Even if our attempts at particularizing it fall short of the mark in terms of the actual particularizing. But even in that falling short, reality is revealed. The most essential point that actual spirituality, that yoga turns on, is the fact that experience is unresolvable. Which means very simply that it's impossible to tell the exact state or condition or ultimate nature of anything whatsoever that is being experienced. Now, of course, this is very contrary to our normal human functioning, where we think we know what things are, we think we know what people are, we think we know what situations are, we think we know what cause and effect is, and so on and so forth. And as a rule of thumb, it's fine to have this approximation in terms of functioning, which we're all very familiar with. But the problem is, and the problem as it shows up in terms of spirituality proper, is that we forget that these are approximations. We forget that these are rules of thumb. And in actual fact, we're clueless in terms of the actual absolute nature of anything whatsoever. So that the conditions, any condition that's being experienced is a mystery, is a question mark, is an unknown, is an unresolvable actuality that is actual, it is present as experience, but exactly what it is and exactly how it is a question mark, is an unknown. Far from being a problem, this turns out to be a wonderful, a wonderful condition, in the sense that the strain of the normal human mode of pretending we know what's going on, pretending we know what everything is, claiming that we know who we are and what we're doing, claiming we have a clue as to how we're approaching our lives, and claiming, all of the sorts of things that we feel we've been brainwashed as children to feel has some urgency and some importance to be able to maintain. You're supposed to be able to come up with an answer if someone says, "Who are you? What are you doing?" You're not supposed to say, "I don't know, I don't have a clue." That's generally an unacceptable response. So you're supposed to be able to at least to pretend to play the game. "Oh, I'm Peter Brown, and I'm such and such, and I was born so and so, and I, this and that and the other, and blah blah blah." You're supposed to be able to regurgitate a lot of claims that are supposed to be more or less factual, and we feel some urgency psychologically to be able to do that. But it's also a lot of strain psychologically to maintain this this effortful creation of all of this narration, which we know at bottom is bullshit. We know at bottom that we don't really have a clue. Children know this. An infant, when it's born, it knows it doesn't know anything. It's just, wow, all of this amazing overload of actuality. And yet, of course, we're trained very very thoroughly, more or less, and systematically, more or less, or haphazardly, as the case may be, in being able to to name things, being able to designate things, being able to know addition tables and multiplication tables, know mathematics, know all of these things, which are basically arbitrary games that we are taught are essential to play, and we're taught they're actual, and neither is true. It's not essential to play them, and they're not actual. They're completely arbitrary. They're like Monopoly. And we have an open mic, and it is someone who is an admin. I can find the A's. There we go. I found it, and I muted it. Nipped it in the bud. Could have been a disaster. So anyway, and also it's a lot of strain. It's a lot of tension to subliminal psychological tension to maintain this pretense of identity, this pretense of a curriculum vitae and a history and all of these facts and figures you're supposed to be able to regurgitate on demand. And this is there's a wonderful old Yiddish phrase, Weltschmerz, which means the pain of the world, the pain of life. Why it feels so good to get intoxicated or to go in bed at night and just let go of all that, because it's like, I can just let go into my state of unknowing, and it's so easy and so effortful and so natural. And then you wake up and you have to, immediately and effortfully reconstruct all of this structure that you're supposed to hold, basically in your imagination. It's all fantasy about who you are and what you're doing and what you have to do, and all of these rules of the game that we're all have been indoctrinated in, that it's so urgent to play. But the point of all this is that the conditions that obtain, the conditions that are present in this actuality, are not the conditions that we imagine are present, are not the conditions as we define them. We define, we suppose there's a world, we suppose there's a body, we suppose there's space and time, we suppose there's cause and effect, we suppose there's history, we suppose blah, 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 blah. All of this elaborate, incredible, complex worldview, which is all fantasy. It's all complete hogwash. The actual condition is just a question mark. It's just this that is, you can't even say here, because here is another question mark. What does here mean? This that is, or even this or that is too much, and probably is too much too. So what you have is, and that's it. That is the totality of actuality, and all of the fantasy and all of the imaginary elaborations that we typically feel it's so urgent to be, somewhat skilled in, is hogwash. And it's fine to play all these human games. It's fine to pretend to be functional. It's fine to be able to get a job and speak a language and pretend to get along with the people around you and all this stuff. But don't believe that you actually are that, or you'll be selling yourself short on what's actually here. Because in this undefinable actuality that is present, there is a fullness, a completeness, an independent existence, an open-endedness, a lusciousness, a beauty, an exquisiteness that cannot be found in the pared down, the censored, the incredibly restricted versions that we manufacture in our imaginations. And so this is the nature of realization. This is the nature of the fabled enlightenment. This is the nature of liberation. It's simply noticing that experience is undefinable. In actuality, it happens to be that it is that way. This is not something that you have to aspire to or hold as a philosophy or something like that. Simply look at your experience and realize that you're absolutely clueless as to the nature of what anything actually is or how it is. I mean, how is this appearing? How is your field of vision full of light? How is your body? How is your heart beating? How is anything? What is anything? What is light? What is matter? what is consciousness? These are absurd questions because there's no answer. This that is here is as it is, and even that is saying way too much. And that turns out to be actually a very powerful fact, a very delightful fact, and an empowering fact, and a liberating fact. And simply exploring the way that this is in fact, empirically and self-verifyingly actually true, is the nature of yoga, is the nature of spiritual investigation. And with this discovery, you discover you're freed from who you thought you were. You're not who you thought you were. You're not stuck in the circumstances you thought you were stuck in. You're not diminished and little and dependent and needy. You are inconceivable presence. You are inconceivable openness. You are beyond space and time. All of these become, completely obvious and explicit, and you don't even need to think them or again hold them as philosophical principles or something. It's just, you simply look and you see, oh yeah, duh, that's how it is. So it's very simple and self-verifying, and that very, very simple observation is the basis of all spirituality ultimately, and the basis of what I call this yoga. Concepts are non-relational. What this means is that, more to take it from the other end, concepts, thought pretends to be about something. When you're thinking, the train of thought and the process of conceptualization seems to present itself as if it's referential, if it's referring to something. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say, or I'm thinking about what this computer looks like, or I'm thinking about taking a sip of tea. And the about there is a very slippery and subtle thing. Concepts, of course, coexist with all of experience, but they don't actually refer to experience in the way that they pretend to, which is, in one sense, which is the basic assumption or the basic concept that gets us all screwed up, because we think we're thinking about things. We think we're processing data that actually refers to something, whereas thoughts only refer to the fact of their own existence, like all energy, presence, and experience only refers to the fact of its own existence. It's radiant presence. It shows up, bang. Light is, thought is, sound is, and all of these apparent energy events, energy presences, are instantaneous, miraculous shining forths that have only to do with what they are, which is, of course, radiant presence itself, which is this amazing phenomena that is here. And yet you might say, well, wait a minute, thought seems to be so pregnant with all of this information and all of this implication and what's up with that? Well, it is, but it's not so because it's actually referential. It is so because all of radiant presence is like that. All radiant presence is pregnant with interrelatedness of its nature, which is pregnant with interrelatedness with all aspects of its nature. So radiant presence is itself pure intelligence. I've often called this the inherent intelligence, which is just literally infinitely rich with implication, and the implication is an intelligent implication. It's a meaningful implication. It's the implication that we go off on not just when we're thinking, but when we're feeling something. You feel a texture, or you look at a particular light, and if you just let yourself sort of melt into it, or whatever, you'll notice that you're just gone endlessly, and it's an infinite richness, it's an infinite subtlety that never finds bottom, that never stabilizes into anything. And of course, this applies to thought as well as to any other apparent bandwidth of experience. So seeing this is, in a way, it's subtle, but in another way, it's very obvious. But it's profound because, the notion that thought is not referential. Then when your thoughts are churning and you're thinking this and thinking that and thinking the other, it's not really about anything. It's about its own internal logic. It's about its own internal argument. Thought thinks about itself. And of course, this is actually pretty obvious when you watch other people. Say you're in a social situation, you watch other people babbling about whatever fantasies are going on in their mind. It's quite obvious that it's not about anything actual. But of course, it can be more subtle in our own case, because we can fall into that trap, that subtle cul-de-sac of thinking that, wait a minute, but I'm actually thinking about something. What I'm thinking matters. It's real. It's relevant. And I have to suss it out. I have to grapple with it. I have to get to the bottom of what's going on here. So, the implications of noticing or discovering that thought is non-referential is in a way subtle, but in another way very large. The feeling of seeing truly the thought is not referential, it frees it. It frees it to just be what it is, without having any particular importance. It's not a privileged bit of bandwidth. It has no priority over anything else. So, patterns of light that are appearing are exactly as relevant as patterns of thought that are appearing, exactly as relevant as patterns of touch that are appearing, or so on. And they all are the totality of reality, the message of reality, the meaning of reality, the expression of reality, if you want. Every portion is the whole. Every portion is what it is. There's no portion of it which is privileged or special or more communicatively what it is. So in practical terms, a good way to, as I often speak of in other contexts, a good way to be with experience is texturally, be with the texture of your experience, and without being too precise or too precious about what exactly you mean by that, but you just feel your way into the inconceivable fineness and lusciousness and precision of anything that appears. And this applies to thought too. Thought itself is a texture, just in the same way that light is a texture. You can easily tell whether you're seeing something or thinking something. How? Because it has a different texture. And the same with touch. Every apparent bandwidth of experience seems to have a different texture, which is how we differentiate it very intuitively and automatically, of course. And thought is no different. Thought has a texture. Thought can be felt, and the most powerful way of being with thought is to be with it texturally, feel what it is in the same sense that the most powerful way to be with light is to be with it texturally, feel what it is, and so on and so forth. And of course, in this context, one discovers that it is not at all what one thought it was. And the revelation of what it actually is apparent and immediate, which is, of course, the very essence of yoga, which is the whole point of all this, is to discover what is actually here, the way it's actually here, as opposed to all of our absurd fantasies about what we think it is or what we think we are. The interesting question is, what exactly is going on here? What is this that is here? What are you? What is your world? What is your life? So on and so forth. Any thinking person, that isn't the central issue that's addressed in one guise or another, in one context or another. To approach it radically, to really discard all assumptions and work from first principles and come to see for yourself exactly what this is a course of action that seems to be a little bold or considered foolish by the majority of people. But some of us are either bold or foolish and enter into this engagement more profoundly under the notion that we may actually achieve results. It happens that this is actually possible. It happens that it is possible to actually discover what this is, what you are, because it is not concealed, it's not hidden. It's plainly on display, and even though what it is extremely strange and subtle and profound, you, the perceiving intelligence that is experiencing all this, is also extremely subtle and profound. So what you are is intrinsically aligned with and up to the of the very nature of what you're trying to understand, so you actually have the ability to do so. Now, all of this, I expect most of you may have heard if you've listened to my talks and all that. Some of the interesting fine points, of course, are that it can be very difficult to switch gears or to accept that this is the way that it actually is, because one factor that's very difficult to swallow is how inconceivably detailed and precise and controlled all of the manifestation and experience is. It seems to be very easy to accept this if we distance ourselves from it. If we say, oh, it's all the objective universe, so the fact that it's inconceivable intricacy and interlocking precision is somehow more acceptable that way. The notion that what you are is all of this has a leap of faith involved, in a certain sense, of being able to, how could this level of detail be the product of what I am? But how could this level of detail be the product of anything? I mean, we say, to blame it, to defer it all off to the laws of physics or the history of the universe or the ramifications of the Big Bang is as if that made it more acceptable or more easy to swallow is ridiculous. The fact that it is of the level of precision it is of the level of intricacy and complexity that it is, and whatever is doing it is manifestly doing it. So exactly what that is, that needs to be not you, that needs to be some other, that you have to be some lesser entity that is somehow subject to all that, as opposed to of the very nature of what is doing all that and what all that consists of, is actually doesn't have a leg to stand on if you look at it. But still and all, with our inferiority complexes and our essential Western human self-loathing, it still becomes a difficult, can be a difficult step to take. Clearly, the level of intelligence and sheer bravado of power that is in evidence with this astounding, detailed and intricate, infinite manifestation is awe-inspiring. But again, all of this issue, this trepidation to consider, the that the potency that is doing all this is one with the potency that you are, is really a superficial issue. Because again, if one looks specifically and precisely at one's real-time experience and looks what is here, one finds this miraculous experiencing event. This miraculous seeming potency of perception, of consciousness, of whatever it is being hypothesized to be, that is somehow perceiving this degree of intricacy. And all of this, there is no external agents that can be found. There are no external conditions that can be found. This condition, this bubble of your experience, is all-inclusive. There is no outside, and hypothesizing there is an outside is only possible because of its existence. One of the surprising discoveries in the course of this yoga, as one moves into the more advanced stages, shall we say, is that one is not a piece of anything. One is not a spark of anything. There's all these poetic images, how there's, the great ocean, I am a drop in the great ocean, or I am a spark of the central fire, or I am, somehow some derivative or some partialization of something that is vast and huge and all-inclusive. And the discovery comes that actually this isn't so. Actually, I'm it. I'm everything. The presence that I feel is the sole presence. I'm putting this in first-person terms, which is an artifact of language. But your existence is the existence, is the sole existence, not just in a philosophical sense or some abstract metaphysical sense, but concretely. You are it. There's a quote which is often repeated, made by Nisargadatta, which is something along the lines of, the world exists because you are, because you exist, not the other way around. And this is literally true. This is profoundly true. And of course, in the course of this yoga, one comes to this discovery very directly and very self-verifyingly, as a self-verifying concrete fact. It's not an abstraction or an implication. It's just, oh wow, this is it. In the most literal, concrete, immediate sense possible. This that is here, this that is my experience, this that is my being, is it. This is the whole shooting match. And trying to parse that in terms of some kind of a rationale of, okay, I exist, but you exist too. Well, in terms of the yoga, you don't exist. And then maybe if you exist, maybe for you, in terms of the yoga, I don't exist. But that's the fact that doesn't make sense, to the fact that you can't parse that into some geometry of I'm the sole existent reality and you're the sole existent reality too, is irrelevant. You can't make sense of this stuff. This is not a rational phenomena. This is not a logical phenomena that's occurring here. It is what it is. And the yogi's task is to embrace and penetrate what this is and let it show you what it is. And so this is one of the more startling discoveries in this path, that your being is the being. You are it. You are the great extreme. You are the Tao. You are you are God. Mystical literature is full of mystics, Al-Halaj going out to the street corner and crying out, I am God, I am the light, and in my turban is wrapped nothing but God. And he got stoned for it because that's a sacrilege. But, he just made the mistake of opening his mouth in a fundamental Islamic country. So, and this, this discovery is here for the taking, so to speak. It is here for the stumbling upon, and it's an inevitable point in this yoga is coming to this discovery, because this is the literal truth. This is also it's really the transition from feeling one is an individual, a lowly individual stuck in one's karma and subject to the vast universe and subject to the whims of fortune and all this, to the clear revelation, oh my God, it's not like that. It really isn't like that. I mean, there is all this weird stuff that looks like karma and that looks like circumstance and all that, but somehow it's all in me, and it's all me, and I'm not subject to it. It is subject to me. And again, this is not something that you can make sense of or parse or even philosophize about, but it is immediately, self-verifyingly actual, concretely the case. And again, this is a discovery that one comes to as in the later stages of this yoga. Or perhaps in the earlier stages if you're lucky, eh? Go for it. So that's one aspect that popped into my mind to talk about today. And another aspect that popped into my mind, which is perhaps a more obvious one, that is talked about more often in many guises, is that the conceptual thought, analytical thought, well, actually referential thought, let's call it that, is like a funhouse mirror. It's always inaccurate. It always distorts. And of course, this is one of the ways that we get ourselves into trouble, is following our referential thoughts, supposing that our thought refers to circumstances with some degree of accuracy or some degree of relevance, and then we work with these trains of thoughts and expect the actual circumstances to somehow correlate with these trains of thought. But this is very iffy, because again, referential thought is essentially distorting, is like a funhouse mirror. It's not necessarily wholly devoid of information, but the information that it contains is not likely to bear any similarity to the actual circumstance or actuality that the thought pretends to refer to. Thought is not wholly devoid of meaning, because the nature of energy forms is all energy forms resonate with all other energy forms, and in a way that they kind of reflect each other or embody each other in a non-linear, transcendental way, which can't really be talked about, which phenomena I sort of sum up under the notion of the inherent intelligence. Everything is intelligent, everything has a profound meaningfulness, and all forms reflect that meaning, reflect that, you could call it the inherent logic, or illogic, if you like, of this actuality that is here. So that the energy forms that appear in experience are not simply, in a simple sense, they're not mechanical, dull, accidental chunks of inert stuff that just happen to be sitting there the way they are. On the contrary, they are a reflection of a profound hyper-intelligence and a hyper-meaningfulness, which shows up as the astounding functionality of all energy systems, biological life forms, and subatomic particles relating to each other according to the nature of physics, and all of these astounding interrelational functionalities that are readily apparent in experience. All energy forms embody meaningfulness and reflect the same meaningfulness as all other energy forms.